Hey everybody, welcome to another installment of We Got Issues, a show for geeks by geeks that explore all the important issues of the comic book multiverse. Comics have been blamed for the corruption of youth, presenting the idea that violence is a permissible solution for making the world a better place. Recently, Sharon Lamb of the University of Massachusetts presented a study to the American Psychological Association that superheroes are not positive role models. Her quote, "Today's superhero is too much like an action hero who participates in non-stop violence. He's aggressive, sarcastic, and rarely speaks to the virtue of doing good for humanity. When not in superhero costume, these men, like Iron Man, exploit women, flaunt bling, and convey their manhood with high-powered guns." So, welcome to another episode of We Got Issues. I'm your host, Paul Davis Lyons, with my guests, Maggie Curtis, William White, and Chad Parento. So, guys, what are your thoughts about this study that Ms. Lamb performed?
It's about time comics get blamed for something. It's been so long.
It's kind of strikes me as, I mean, I can understand why they think maybe like if you expose a child to constant violence, maybe like in a wartime environment or an abusive household, how you could then see maybe that a child would act differently. But I don't think like people are honestly looking at these fictional characters as honest to God role models. It's not like, like, I saw Batman jump off a roof, so I'm jumping off a roof too. It's when's the last time I put on capes and tights and beat the hell out of someone for jaywalking?
You don't actually ever see someone in costume running around. No. I don't think I've ever really seen that.
Well, I mean, I have.
There have been some reports.
There's some people out
actually,
there.
yeah, there was the guy who dressed as a ninja last year and impaled himself on a fence.
Oh right.
Well, that's what you get for being an idiot.
Yeah, he was a drunk ninja though, so.
He's probably trying to do his ninja arts and failed.
Yeah, but that's a different issue.
Drunken ninjas are more known for their flair than their sense of stealth,
Yeah, no, but I mean the point being that there's that obvious disconnect between the fictional world and the real world. Now, through constant exposure, could we wind up with some sort of traumatic issue? Yeah, but I think blaming, as Ms. Lamb was, that very direct correlation that somehow just because I see Iron Man go drunk suiting or piloting the Iron Man suit, I would do the same.
Yeah, and comics, it's not really an isolated case. They're not the only ones being blamed because you got movies, Matrix was blamed when the whole Columbine shooting happened. And I know Marilyn Manson, his music has been blamed.
Civil suit.
It's almost like no one wants to take responsibility. That's almost like an easy way out.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's kid. You have kids. You have to actually pay attention to them. We live in a time where parents work all day. You don't have a stay-at-home mom making dinner for you every day. I mean, people have to work. I mean, this is the way society is now. And just because your kids are acting up, it doesn't mean it has to do anything with movies or comic books. Just maybe you should be paying attention to what your kids are watching and reading and seeing if it's appropriate. I mean, at the store, I've sold, I had somebody come in asking me to give them a Ginger Romantica, which is a yaoi, to buy it for a 12-year-old girl. And it was really hard to tell her that she was buying a porno for her 12-year-old daughter.
Now, for those who don't know, a yaoi is it's just two guys.
Two guys to get guy on guy porno for girls. So, and she was trying to buy a really smutty one, you know what I mean? And she was 12.
It wasn't even classy porno.
It wasn't even good, but people are parents are not communicating enough with their children, and that's it's just, it happens. I mean, or they're either way too protective, and then so they go off and they do something stupid, or they're not protective enough, I guess. People gotta relax.
Yeah.
Going back to the study, I have only read clippets like a lot of us here. Now, was the study focusing mostly on comics or on superheroes in general?
It was superheroes in general.
It seems it's kind of ironic that the study was probably spurred on by the movies like Iron Man, when Tony Stark is just like this wonderful bastard, and that, as an adult, why I can appreciate him. And it's kind of funny because the movies, compared to what you see in a lot of comics, are incredibly vanilla. The scenes I saw in Kick-Ass the movie actually pale in comparison to what you see in the comic books. And the comic books are 10 times more violent than what they can show in the movies.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you kind of wind up with which is worse though, a more realistic presentation or these really ridiculous, over-the-top presentations?
Right.
And especially too, because I think we were talking earlier. About how there's no real consequences in comics. It's not like you have a issue where someone tries to put their shattered femur back together and spends months in rehabilitation and painful physical therapy only to find out they'll never be able to run again or something like that.
Yeah.
That's
true. I mean, or even then, it's everyone comes back from the dead. Everyone. There's no real permanence to the acts of
That's
violence.
true.
You're mostly talking about DC, where it just seems like everything is being like hypercharged and everything hyper violent. The biggest example, I sent you some graphics, was that whole the Wendy and Marvin characters. They were basically brought back and modernized. They used to be Super Friend cartoon characters, and
What now? They
They were
peel
brought-
off criminals' faces
they were
and wear
brought
them
back.
like masks?
They actually found the dog. They put a cape on it. It's like, oh, it's Wendy, Marvin, and Wonder Dog, and the dog was a trap. Turns into a demon and eats both Wendy and Marvin.
Holy shit.
And it's like,
Wow.
okay, what's the point of this? Going to that, and even like going what you were talking about earlier, Superboy Prime, where
Oh.
he's just like. And Crisis on Infinite Earths was one of my favorite titles, growing up as as a kid, and just seeing like Superman, the Superboy character from that story, just like go running rampant and blood on his hands, ripping heads off, and all this, it's kind of retroactively being, saying, oh, that was all satire. It was like basically a commentary on like fanboys. And I'm
But
like,
isn't
what?
that particular story you're talking about like didn't that kind of like set the course for how DC will be run for years to come? And isn't the world DC now still as a consequence of what happened in Crisis on Infinite Earths? I mean, I haven't read it, but from what I understand from
Yeah.
other people who have, it's kind of like this thing happened and there was really no going back. Which is something I can appreciate because I read comics like, yeah, it's cool, these guys are fighting and all that, but I don't really feel any kind of like, is he gonna make it? Because I know that if Colossus dies 6 months later, he's gonna come back. Captain America can get shot, and somehow it was all a whole time travel thing.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you look at right now, like, was it DC, not DC, Marvel with their whole end of Daredevil thing? They already have solicitations out for the return of Matt Murdock.
Right.
It's getting to a point where it's almost ridiculous. There are no consequences to these actions. The stories could be interesting, but it's becoming more cartoonish, and I think that's actually a little bit worrisome. Because once again, I don't think that people really where healthy people aren't going to look at a comic and say, oh, quite obviously, I can now go out and beat the hell out of a villain and I won't get shot. No, I mean, of course it doesn't work that way. But I think it's more, you get sort of that idea that there aren't repercussions to these violence actions. And I don't think if someone is in an unhealthy enough state of mind that they're delusional enough, they could actually start structuring their world around that idea and not really register with the consequences. Because violence is pretty horrific. If you've seen a violent act, it tends to stick with you.
Right. And basic bottom line, I mean, comics, manga, it's really just it's fantasy. I think those of us who read it, I can't speak for everyone, but you're reading it because you're kind of indulging in that. Like, I've been beaten down. Would it be great to rise up and fight against it? But who actually goes out there and actually practices that? I think
Hopefully not very many.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's just all about, it's like being able to handle stuff. Like, some people cannot handle stuff, and they can't, there's a lot of people out there that just can't tell the difference between what's fantasy and what's real. And I mean, just because there's a small amount of people like that, it doesn't mean that everybody who's going to read it is going to start killing people. And then people need to stop blaming media because it's just ridiculous.
Right. And I actually wanted to bring up a point that Chad had emailed me prior to this recording that, have people done more harm than good, taking violence completely out? What constitutes like a good mix? So maybe something you want to try.
Well, yeah, just even using comics as a basic example, Batman used to be a gun-toting, murderer, of people. Superman, in the comics, I think to a lesser extent, but there were like novels and radio stories where he was killing people too. It was during the war, so death was definitely depicted in comics, and and those were targeted towards kids, although it was a more general audience that read Superman, at that time, 30s, 40s.
Right.
But even going back beyond that, before that, the original tales from like the Brothers Grimm were pretty fierce, before they got Disneyfied. I mean, Snow White just is the one that gives me the one that comes to mind the first, where the queen just doesn't die from breaking a mirror. She basically is sentenced to dance in hot shoes of metal that are hot until she dies, and she's doing this in front of Snow White.
Oh, wait, you obviously,
That's
I
like
know
a
the one
wedding.
I has they covered her in goose fat and they baked her alive. That's the
There's a
version I
couple
remember.
variations, but I mean the point is that I think violence in kids stories, and I had college professors that were telling me that those stories were really essential. Like all the Grimm fairy tales were essential for like teaching kids like essential lessons. Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Don't go in strange people's houses. Little Red Riding.
I could have sworn the moral was don't fuck with bears.
Little Red Riding Hood, don't talk to strangers. I mean, the violence in good stories, like for kids, is something that's can work, if done maturely and correctly. I mean, the Bone stories. I gave, my little, I call him my nephew, he's my friend's kid. He's read the whole Bone series. He was affected by like the death and the very relatively small violence in that book. He had to deal with it emotionally, but he was amazed by that story. I mean, it can work. It'd be silly to kind of excise it, but when you have Wendy and Marvin getting eviscerated and like eaten alive by Wonder Dog, it's like what's happened? It's like maybe we took all the violence out and Disneyfied everything, and now we don't know how to put it back.
So it's
in.
like you wind up with those two polar extremes.
Exactly, and that's what I think is where DC is going. I mean, the book, I'm surprised no one's brought up.
Marvel's not getting off the hook on this one. Was it like they're in that siege? Like how many people got torn in half just for no apparent reason?
Very true. Although DC almost seems to be leading just because they seem to have the most.
Where they zombified everyone.
Well, yes, but DC seems to have the most shameless examples. I mean, I'm surprised no one's brought up the rise of Arsenal, which is basically bringing back Green Arrow's sidekick into like a junkie murdering, like never mind the bow. He's like carrying knives now and like stabbing people just at random.
DC really seems to love bringing back previous sidekicks into murderous personas.
It doesn't make any sense. I mean, but the one level, it's like, I'm totally removed from the whole idea of like, is the violence in comics corrupting youth? It's kind of stupid right now, and it kind of needs to like find a middle. I could care less if it's corrupting or not. I clearly don't think it is, at the level of like some people think, but I think it is. It's ridiculous, while we're fighting, if we dicker around with that and forget about making good stories, then, no one's going to read the stories anyway.
That's.
Do you think maybe part of the problem is that maybe it's almost this is probably a really like poor example, but as first it comes to mind like prohibition, you take something away and it just kind of like
makes it more desirable.
Right, because if we're as Chad said, if we're Disneyfying something, is that mean on the opposite end we're getting this really gritty, violent stuff because on some level we're kind of.
Oh, I mean,
and I shouldn't vilify Disney, even though sometimes they do deserve it. I mean, but all companies are trying to make everything safe for like one single like multi-age market. Everything is being
that's what Disney does.
That's what everyone's doing
Marvel,
now. And Disney used to be pretty fierce with its stuff too. If you look at some of their war propaganda films, I mean,
or the cartoons.
Yeah, even just like kind of like weird mock documentaries. There's this one that goes around called Education for Death, which is basically talking about like Hitler educating his youth. It's kind of creepy if you find it, but it's like public domain. But they had some weird stuff too in that era, but now everyone's following the lead of just everything has to be safe for children or everything has to be completely like splatterhouse crazy.
Yeah.
Well, I think people can push the bar a lot more. And but we have to remember violence in comics is pretty sweet. You know what I mean? Like when you walk down the street and you're like, oh, wouldn't that be so sweet if not like sweet, but like somebody try to rob my purse right now, and like I totally kick their ass. Like you imagine like you're doing this like crazy kung fu move, like running up walls, and because it's just like doing something ridiculous, and that's like it's fun, But
comics are definitely much more
fun,
they're very wish fulfillment. That's very much what
exactly. It's just like it's stupid and fun. I mean,
or
it can be
farcical. Like the violence can just be. Told as a joke, whether you're talking about like Crazy Cat, which I don't think anyone was starting to hit people in the face with bricks, and that's what Ignaz used to do to Crazy Cat each and every strip. And Brave and the Bold, I don't think that's making kids violent, like seeing Batman like punch people.
Right. Now, there was a certain point in time, I want to say '86, where comics definitely did take a darker, grittier turn. You had Dark Knight Returns. Frank Miller, Alan Moore's The Watchmen, V for Vendetta. I mean, that was definitely where comics. It wasn't just like bam, pow, bang. There was like nudity, like blood, like people were dying and not necessarily always coming back. So that's something I just kind of wanted to bring up as well. There was.
I think with using The Dark Knight Returns as an example, and like I think what we kind of get to is the point where you can have because Frank Miller, like his early stuff like Dark Knight Returns, I really enjoyed. His later stuff, he went off the deep end. It was just too much. And I think it was interesting. He kind of hit a middle ground there. He wasn't going for full-on realism, but there was a moment in it where Batman jumped off a building and landed on some guy, some punk who'd been firing a gun or something, and broke his hips. And literally, some cop goes, "Oh my God, he's not going to walk again." Batman's like, "I don't care." And that's the thing. There was a repercussion to the violence. Quite obviously, Batman understood his actions, followed through with them, and had no remorse, and that's kind of made him a little bit scary and detached. And it was kind of interesting because it didn't glorify the violence. You understood there was a cause and effect that led up to it, but Batman seemed kind of creepy for it, and I kind of like that because it wasn't done. It's not like you suddenly had like shards of pelvis exploding out of the guy or something like that. It wasn't like his head blew up, but it was definitely a unique step. I'd say like a middle ground almost. It was equivalent to the violence you'd see like maybe in a PG-13 movie.
Then
And-
the turning ground was like The Dark Knight Strikes Back, where you know it's
Oh my
so
God.
incredibly crazy. It's not my favorite book to say the least, but it just was so nuts you couldn't take it seriously, you know.
Yeah.
And now you have the Jim Lee, Frank Miller Batman, where you can't tell if it, you know, people go back and forth
I'm the
online saying
goddamn
this
Batman.
is this a joke or is it not? And you could probably go through like 15 pages of like, you know,
Yeah.
internet message board debates as to whether or not it is.
Yeah,
it's-
it's.
I mean, that's where like the violence just gets so over the top in the depiction. You just don't know what the hell this is.
Well, I think people can just do whatever they want now.
Well,
I
people
mean-
stopped buying it, so yeah,
Yeah.
and DC stopped printing it, so
Yeah.